During the Olympics, many people have criticized the U.S. team for the lack of player movement, lack of ball movement, and the isolation play that kind of typifies basketball in the U.S. right now. And one of the ignored elements or factors in this is the way that players drive to the basket. And so if you watch many players, not just U.S. players, but generally speaking, U.S. players, we learn to drive to the basket at full speed. And this is often emphasized, and common instructions are to get to the basket as few dribbles as possible, as quickly as possible, to beat that help side rotation. And so when you watch really great players, whether it's a Chris Paul or whether it's a European point guard, they tend to play slower. Not always necessarily in terms of foot speed, although sometimes, but surely the game slows down for them. So they're able to make decisions while they're driving to the basket. They're able to adjust to situations. And so as I watched Serbia play this afternoon, you can see that the drives to the basket often are less than full speed. And some people will attribute this difference to U.S. players being faster, U.S. players being more athletic. I don't really think so. I think that they're if U.S. players are driving at 100% speed, I'm guessing Serbia's point guard is driving more 90% speed. Fast enough to get there, but also with enough control that it's easy to change. Whether to decide to pass, to pull up for a shot, change directions on the drive, whatever the case is. And so you see this in great point guards, is they often look like they're going less than full speed, even when they are moving really fast with the ball, because the game slows down for them mentally. But I think this is one factor in the lack of ball movement in the U.S. teams, is because, and the lack of player movement, is because when you're going at full speed, it's harder to change directions or to change decisions. So if you've decided you're going to the basket to shoot a layup and the help defense rotates over, it's harder to make the next pass or to change directions on your drive or whatever the case may be. And it requires more spacing. And so that's why you often see U.S. teams that have players standing in the corner, and maybe a high ball screen with another player on the weak side, and that allows for two things. One, it does space out the offensive players. Consequently, the defensive players have to make a choice, and it also allows the offensive player driving to the basket to know exactly where his teammates are if he does have to bail out of the drive. So if somebody cuts off his drive, he knows where to do it. This is one of the reasons why I devised the blitz basketball offense when I was coaching 9-year-olds, because I wanted to simplify the system for them so that they had kind of an either-or decision. So if they drove to the basket and a help defensive player slid over from their right, they knew exactly where their teammate was, as opposed to having to search, and account for all 9 players on the court. They could just account for 2, which simplified the decision-making process. When you watch some of the European teams, they're able to keep players moving, which reduces the spacing to an extent, because they're able to make these decisions or these changes because they're not at 100% speed. So if I'm dribbling towards the basket and somebody's cutting into my space, I can divert, or I can make that backdoor pass, or I might be able to flip behind for a handoff. Based on where the defense is and where my teammate moves. And so I think this idea of being able to drive to the basket with less than 100% speed, so that we can incorporate a little bit more ball movement and a little bit more player movement, is one way that we can get away from the isolation heavy basketball. Because if players keep moving, it takes away, once you get used to it, it takes away some of the help defense, because your help defenders are now chasing teammates instead of staying in the lane to prevent the roller rolling to the basket or to help on a drive or whatever the case may be. However, it does make it, if the defensive player does help, it does make it harder for the ball handler to find the correct pass because that player is in motion instead of stationary in the corner. So it's something the players need to learn to adapt and to play with. And some of the teams do this very well, and players play off of each other very well, and so they're able to move while another player is driving. Whereas typically in the U.S. you'll see more stationary players, and as soon as a player starts to drive, everybody else stays stationary, and now the driver knows, where his outlet pass is if he gets cut off. And so I think the emphasis that we have in terms of the lack of player movement is simply on, the isolation basketball, and I think we need to look past that and look at both the speed of drive and the speed of drive from a mental and a physical standpoint. And then also how we can teach players to be able to move while a teammate's driving, but not get in the way of the drive, and be able to then, as a driver, be able to play off with the option to pass off the drive or take it all the way to the basket or pull up for a shot. And so I think this is where we need to, instead of just focusing on we need to get rid of isolation basketball, that's not really a solution, that's just identifying a problem. And so to me, the solution is learning and developing players who can adjust and adapt on their drives and be able to play in a little bit tighter areas so they don't need as much space on their drive to be able to be successful and be able to protect the ball, and then ultimately to be able to create the shot either for themselves or for a teammate.